It's April 27th, 1999. I'm interviewing Harold Gresson, and my name is Utah Reuter, and the camera operator is Susan Acuna. Mr. Gresson, can you take me back to your parents and when you were born and give me a little information about their names and where and when you were born?
Yes, ma'am. I was born March the 26th, 1921, small community of Cumberland County, a small town of Gresson, halfway between Indianapolis and St. Louis on US 40. My grandparents was Ross Gresson and Estelle Gresson. On my father's side, on my mother's side, my grandparents were Bert Travis and Mary Travis. My father was Dorothy Gresson, and my mother was Myrna Gresson, all raised and reared in the Cumberland County, Illinois. I was born on a farm, 5 miles south of town, resided at the farm until I was 5 years old, moved to town. Started school at the age of 5, went through grade school, and then Greenup High School. Graduated at the age of 16 and a half years. My childhood was very, very average. Born of very, very modest means. We were poor, but everybody else was too, and we didn't know it. I had pleasant, wonderful Christian home, fine parents, really blessed with my childhood. And like I say, didn't have anything, didn't know any better. Of course, the outside toilet was a great blessing. When we got an inside toilet, that was something wonderful. Wasn't long till we might have had a radio we could sit and listen to. Then, of course, my mother worked at the factory. My father did what jobs he could obtain. My grandfather, Ross Gresson, was a more fortunate person. He had started a small, sort of mercantile type grain and feed business in this small community, and was a relatively successful businessman. Well, throughout the history of the 40-some years that he was in this business, like I say, it went from a small mercantile into a very, very profitable and prosperous business. Well, my father was not educated to the point of being able to fulfill my grandfather's shoes. So fortunately, I fell into that capacity. I graduated from high school at 16 and a half. I had 1 year of a very special business accounting course from Indiana State University at Terre Haute, Indiana. Came back to the small town of Greenup, and my grandfather just kicked me on upstairs. I'd been downstairs for a lifetime. I knew what the scoop shovel felt like, and I knew what the coal bins looked like, and I knew what the hay fields looked like. I had paid my dues. Well, fortunately, I was able to fulfill that capacity. And about 18 and a half, my grandfather's health failed him almost to death point, and the business fell full responsibility on me. Fortunately, me and the banker, and I guess God himself worked us through that. We got along well, continued to make a little money, and I guess I could have actually avoided service, because I was really worth more at home running that business than I was in service. So basically, I guess the Selective Service Board might have taken some of that in consideration. But see, I was not inducted till August the 22nd, 1942. Well, I was born in 21. So I was over 21 years old when I was inducted. And lots of people had already had 4 years service by then. But I just thought I would explain partially why that come about. Well,
Back to your childhood a little bit. What are some of your earliest memories?
Well, some of my very earliest memories is My grandmother, Estelle Gresson, she was an elegant lady. Really. She was very, very active in the community work and whatnot. Very proud of her grandkids and all the rest of it. But they used to have Baptist visitation summer churches. I don't know just what you call them. I guess they were just evangelistic deals. Some of the women would take their kids and they'd go to certain places and stay in other people's homes and whatnot. Well, my grandmother always made sure, from the age of about 3 to about 6 anyhow, that I went to 2 or 3 Baptist dealings with her.
Is that what they call like the old-fashioned tent revival?
Well, it was, I guess you'd have to call it that. It was just a, can't think of the word right off, but so simple. Well, revival meetings. Mm-hmm. That's what they really were. And then, like I say, the congregation would ask a few people to show up. My grandmother would always be one of them. And I'd usually be tagging along with her. So I remember going and spending lots of time in other people's homes. That's number one. Of course, number two was the advantage, as well as lots of disadvantages, but more advantages, was having this business to grow up in. Because while all the other kids was out in the summertime running around, I was doing something constructive. Not that I missed anything in childhood. Didn't miss a thing. My parents didn't work me. I wasn't a slave, but really had an education starting at 6 as far as being in and around public and whatnot. And of course, I was a fair athlete in school. I was president of our class at one time. And like I say, when you had one granddad as a policeman and the other one was mayor, you didn't have too many problems in town. And I usually had a borrowed car from my grandfather, which was very, like I say, I know I was spoiled. Borrowed his car one night, about 16 I guess, to go to a movie. We went to a movie, but it was at Indianapolis, Indiana, 140 miles away. Well, never one word ever said about it, except, son, you was out pretty late last night, weren't you? And he said, must burn a little gasoline. And I said, well, we did, and that's all that was ever said about it. But like I say, I was not a brat, but I had a sister and a cousin that was both about my age, you know, associated, but I was the boy. And I was the one that was Granddad's protege. I know that. And they made it pretty obvious. So, yes, my childhood was good and great. Now, when we moved into town at the age of 5, we moved right across the street from a Presbyterian church. Like I say, this was a small community, 1,500 people if you counted some of them twice maybe. But anyway, this was a nice little Presbyterian church. And my people basically had confessed to be Baptist, but there was no Baptist church within 5-6 miles. That's a long ways by horse and buggy, Model A Ford. So I got to go into, we just walked across the road, 75 feet of home, we was in church. Well, I grew up in this church, and it was one of the finest things that could happen to any youth. They never locked the door. Never locked the door. They gave us boys, 7 or 8, 10 of us, responsibility to start with of keeping the building clean. Had a nice basement in it, and they allowed us to make a recreational room out of the basement. Of course, like everything else, it was only as good as your character would allow it to be. But we had a pool table. We had places to play dominoes or cards. We'd go down there. We had a little record player. We'd play records. And sometimes girls would go with us. We'd even dance a little. Well, I know it was a church house, but it was a wonderful place to grow up in. And I'll swear, if white kids can't take privilege of this today and make it really what it was built to be, I cannot understand. Because that was the greatest, well, that was a night out for us. And I mean to tell you, it was just wonderful fellowship. And the old folks really pushed it because they knew that of the situation. Oh, somebody might drop in sometime, some evening and whatnot, but nobody ever chaperoned it. It didn't need chaperoning. Fortunately, like I say, nobody was jealous of anybody else. Somebody might have stole a chicken from mom and dad and sold it for 50 cents to have enough money to come to town. But other than that, well, that was about all that went on. And that was, well, I got to say that my childhood was just superb. I always had adequate clothes, but I will tell this little story because it's the truth too. When I was trying to go to college, I was fortunate enough that I had a beautiful top coat. I can see it today. It was a real light gray with black checks, about 1-inch checks. Double-breasted with belt on it, collar turned up, you know. A little bit of gray spats to go along with your shoes, and a little derby hat. Lord, I was king. And I really liked that top coat. It cost $12. $12 was half a week's work back then. Well, that, like I say, that top coat was my pride and joy. And I was walking 10, 12 blocks from where I was staying in my school. Well, folks come to see me one time. Like I say, Terre Haute, Indiana was only 40 miles from where we lived, so it was easy to commute back and forth. They come over one weekend, and the sun was shining. I left the coat laying on the front seat of the car. Well, the next time I saw it, a newspaper boy on the street was selling papers wearing my coat, but he was twice as big as I was, and I forgot about the coat. The moral of the story is, that's the last top coat I got till I got out of service. Didn't have another $12. Wasn't big enough to get it back. And I just forgot it. But now my college was a little unusual compared to today's colleges too. I can't forget to throw this in. I was fortunate. My granddad paid $250 for my tuition. I moved to Terre Haute, Indiana as a complete stranger. Less than 17 years old. I fired a furnace in a two old maids' rooming house from my room. Fired that furnace day and night. Then from the meals, I worked as a busboy in one of the larger cafeterias downtown. So I got fed reasonably well. Then, like I say, I went to school on the side and walked back and forth. Never thought of, you know, cars were unheard of. But I got a pretty decent education. Like I say, it was adequate to go back and be able to count my money, run my inventory, and know what a deposit and a check was. And then started from scratch. But basically, that's the way I grew up, and I've got to say it was a wonderful life. I got pushed into a very, very limited education with a little experience. Now that is what carried forth in my Army career that paid off. Now, as like I said, at the age of 21, I was drafted. I was inducted through Chicago and sent from Chicago to Jefferson Barracks, St. Louis. And I was the date of the induction was August the 22nd, 1942. Now, I was at Jefferson Barracks a day or two, and they started dividing us all up sorting us out and whatnot. And you go here and you go there and you do this and you do that, and that's all we knew. Well, ended up on a troop train headed for someplace in Texas that asked for the Air Force. Well, it took us 4 days from St. Louis to Ty on a troop train. Don't ask me where we went. I don't know, but we didn't come direct to Abilene, Texas. And I ended up out here at Camp Barkeley, Texas. And it was about September, the first 5 or 6 days of September of 1942. Now that was a day of experience. That's when life completely changed, and I can't help but say to the better in many ways. But anyway, we'd been issued what little all we had was with us. We was carrying it in one sack. Got off the train at View, Texas. Train headed north and come in from the south someplace. Well, they said, well, the camp's down there so far. Well, they lined up 100 of us roughly. I guess we marched. I know we walked from View to the main gate of Camp Barkeley, and walked in through the main gate of Camp Barkeley to a vacant field out there. Well, it was about 3:30 in the afternoon, maybe 4 o'clock. This was, like I say, the first week of September, and the temperature was in the neighborhood of 90 to 100 degrees. I wasn't used to that kind of heat, neither was any of the others, because we was all, might say, Midwest, northern boys. Well, anyway, they started us off right. There was a whole bunch of hand mowing sickles laying over on the ground, a chop axe or two, and a whole bunch of rolled up canvas. And they said, fellas, you're going to build your house this afternoon. Well, we had to clean off enough of the top of the ground to have what you call a floor in our tent. And we pitched 4-man tent. And I don't think they could have been more than a 12-foot square. They might have been. But they weren't very big. All right? Those who got there first had a wooden platform for about the first 5 or 6. The rest of the necessary tents, 25 or 30, whatever they were, took what the Lord offered you for a floor. That was it. Well, we finally got set up in time to go to bed that night. And then, of course, you get the experience of getting up real early the next morning. And then Army life starts seriously.
Well, what were you thinking when you got there?
I thought the devil had got me for sure. It was a little pampered boy from back home. All of us in the same boat, though. I'd never had it rough. I'd never slept on the ground unless I wanted to. You know what I mean. If I wanted to get in the shade, I found a tree. So it was a little bit different. And like I say, it was the same for all of us. And fortunately, I was 21 instead of 17. That did help. Because, but anyway, the thing that was the most blessing thing to me that ever was this little old high school education I had. I'd taken 1 year typing, and I'd taken a little bit of typing in that course in that 1 year of college. I had some knowledge of record keeping, I had some knowledge of business, and I was well, most unusual. I was the only one of 100 men that could type a typewriter, and my tremendous speed of 30 to 35 words a minute was by far outstanding, which wouldn't have got me an F anywhere else. But anyway, that was the first 5 days of my service in Camp Barkeley, Texas. I was moved into company clerk. Well, the company consisted of, well, the company was, the battalion was the 39th Medical Battalion. Had 3 companies, A, B, and C, of about 100 men each. And they were to be attached to the 3rd Army headquarters in Europe and evacuate the, well, injured soldiers from one evacuation point to another. Exactly where and how, I don't know, but That was the purpose of this training. But I got very little of that. But backing up just a little bit, of course, Camp Barkeley was the largest medical replacement training center in the United States. And over in the MRTC version, there was some real nice, beautiful two-deck barracks. You know, I mean, they had a real nice setup. But us, all of our special troops moving in, you know, just filled in. So we could sit there and look over there and see those beautiful white buildings and look down at the dirt floor. But I don't know just when they built Barkeley, but not long. Of course, the first people that was Camp Barkeley was the 45th Division, and that was the Texas and Oklahoma National Guard, mostly, and they were very, very famous and did a tremendous amount of good during the war. Very proud of the 45th. But I guess they were moving out when we got there, but saw some of the troops. Well, anyhow, backing up now, I started out with this Company A as company clerk. Well, I missed lots of the basic training. A lot more of it probably than I should have. But I had a good first sergeant, and I had a real fine captain doctor. And of course, I guess I was the radar of the organization, if you want to put it that way, according to MASH of today. Company clerk did a little bit of everything for everybody. And within a first month, I'd gone from a buck private of $54 a month to a corporal of $66 a month. So, man, I was living. And I moved in out of that ground floor into a barracks that had a floor full because I was in the non-com organization. So I missed lots of that. Well, life was great, really. I mean, I had good duty. Living with the best there was to be had. Riding in the command car whenever we was riding anywhere. Had a private Jeep if I needed it. Well, that's pretty good for the first 6 weeks of Army compared to some. Now, I went through lots of the basics. Yeah, infiltration course and a 25-mile forced hikes, but just lots of the little stuff I missed. And I probably intentionally figured out something I needed to do pretty bad, like maybe check a morning report that I might have checked the day before. But anyway.
Do you remember the name of the sergeant and the captain that you worked with?
Well, the lieutenant colonel was Goodwin, but he was the battalion headquarters, and he was had been with Maytag Corporation as a corporate officer, and the captain Goodwin was his name. He was a Jewish man, real nice fellow, and Sergeant Wade was now he was an old rough army, and he was about 41 or 2 then, and he was a sergeant. Now, I mean, he was a good sergeant, but he was all of our staff officers were regular Army. And like I say, my stripes let me move right in with them. Well, that other 199 men that walked down that road with me was out there somewhere else. But anyway, that was the beginning of my good life. And fortunately, I adapted to it quickly. And if I say so, I was darn good at it. Well, it wasn't long till my efforts, I guess, began noticed. We'd have inspectors from Washington, D.C. come in. They'd go all over the post everywhere, inspecting records and all the rest of it. Well, fortunately, Company A of the 39th Ambulance Battalion usually headed the list of reports. Well, just to be honest about it, I was never that aware, you know. I did know I was asked a time or two to go on inspection teams with them, and I knew that they'd give me a Class A pass, and I could come and go at town as I pleased. And of course, the restrictions of a Class A pass boils down to this. Very few restrictions, but no red marks. One red mark, and that's all she wrote. The rest of it, you knew what you need to do to keep your nose clean. One red mark's all it took. You know what happened to it? He was on a slow boat to China. They'd always find some replacement. Some troops going overseas for a replacement. Don't screw up. that was the main subject. Well, fortunately, I never had the desire, you know, and I wasn't a sissy, and I went out and I partied some of the boys, but I was always very careful of keeping my nose clean. Well, that's another story. But anyway.
No. When you say you partied with the boys, what did y'all do?
Well, of course, wasn't long we found out that the Grace Hotel was the place to buy whiskey. And you could get a prescription from any druggist at any drugstore. This was no problem. And of course, the women never interested me, but I knew where they were because they were available. And Abilene was not this little church town that it appears today. By their citizens, I shouldn't say this, but lots of people of Abilene took advantage of the service people. I mean, I could relate to some people that got filthy rich off the black markets and all the rest of it. But that's not going to go in this interview. This is this is just something that did happen. Cabs come out the base, normal cars, go to town with 7 to 10 boys in one car, and any place from $1 to $2 a head. Apartments were just nothing. Then, so Abilene, in many ways, took advantage of the camp. And in another way, they were very good to us too. Like I say, if you were looking for good things to do, you found it to do in Abilene. If you wanted to find the trash, it was available. And it would depend on your character and what you wanted. Fortunately, the better things of life was more interesting to me. I just knew these other things existed. I knew how to obtain them if I was of mind to, but they just never interested me. I was more interested in going to the USOs, more interested in going to some church. Some lady might ask you to go to dinner. Well, I was interested in that home-cooked dinner more than I was something else. And so like I say, it just depends on your character as to how you placed yourself or what category you fell in, because it was like anywhere else. It was all there. And of course, even the bootleggers and MPs got a pretty good racket going. You may have heard this story before. The serviceman, not knowing any better, would go to town and he'd buy himself, I think it was $7 or $8 a fifth then, and that's a lot of money. Market-wide, been $2.50, $3, but bootleg was $7 or $8. Fifth of whiskey. Well, the cab driver said, "Oh, son, there's no trouble. I'll get through this gate for you." Well, he'd strap it in under his fenders or his bumpers or someplace, get up to the main gate. MP searched the car, and they knew exactly where to look. "Who's this whiskey from?" "Nobody." Well, nobody knew who that belonged to. So they confiscated. Cab driver come back out, and he'd sell it to another serviceman next trip. And that same bottle may have sold 10 or 12 times in one night, as one example. And so on and so forth. But of course, there's a dice game on every corner. And, but then you had your USOs, you had your churches, you had the finer elements of life if you wanted them. And fortunately, the two USOs, one on North 1st Street now that they're getting ready to rejuvenate, and then the one over on North 3rd Street, were real fine places. And then we had lots of other things in town. Red Cross was always good to the servicemen. And like I say, the church element was fantastic in Abilene. And I guess the thing that helped me in service and let me progress was that I was more interested in the finer elements than the lesser elements. Because character goes a long ways. And I think I was successful for some reason. I don't think character hurt. But anyway.
Did you make any new good friends here when you came
I
to
made a
Barkeley?
tremendous amount of friends here. First of all, one of the greatest friends I ever had was Dr. Paul Southern. Do you know Paul Southern? Well, he's head of the Bible department at ACU for years. He had his 98th birthday this week. He and his wife, and me and my wife, and a few other of the church congregation that we got associated with later in life, spent lots of meals in this house, their house, and lots of social life. So anyway, that was one of the great families we met. And then met many, many others. But then I just can't help but give Dr. Paul Southern some thought. He even married my son. And my wife and I went to church together there before we married. Now, back up in this story, I'm getting two stories one way ahead of the other here. But getting back to the active days, like I say, life was good. Things was going along well. War was progressing reasonably well. Well, we went on maneuvers in, well, sometime in November, got back about the 1st of March. We were at Alexandria, Louisiana. And they'd been in the field, of course, fortunately. There again, the first sergeant, the captain, and the company clerk stayed in headquarters. We didn't go to the field. So that was a little plus. And fortunately, this sergeant and I were best friends, even if he was a 40-year-old man. He was single. He liked to, well, he liked to drink a little more than I liked to be associated with. But he's the one that could get the Jeep. And he and I would, while the rest of them was all out there in the field sleeping in the dirt, he and I'd have a Jeep and we'd go to Freeport if we wanted to, pull into a base and fill it up with gas and come back. We'd make me gone 2 days. Of course, as long as it was the first sergeant, that wasn't too bad. But he was just a good old boy. Never did anything bad, just wasn't a fellow that I'd like taking home to meet my mother, though. But yet not bad either. So anyway, he, after this maneuver trip, came back to Barkeley again. And that's when Washington seemed to shine a little light on my duties. And then we'd had the 11th Headquarters Special Troops of the 4th Army move into Camp Barkeley. What they were doing, they were forming a 4th Army to go to Australia further on down the line. And I'd been in 3rd Army, see. Well, they were building their headquarters. Well, they went through the paperwork and whatnot, and they requisitioned me from 3rd Army and promoted me to Tech Sergeant and moved me from this 39th Medical Battalion into this 11th Special Troop. And that's just what they were, the headquarters for special troops. And their troops included, well, just about anything you think of in the way of transportation, supply, everything but medical. had lots of truck uh, battalions. But they moved me into there, and my title there was strength and ration clerk. And I started drawing rations for all the troops under the command. I'd have morning reports at my desk, and from that I'd take the head count of each company and keep track of their men. If they, well, some of them were on different assignments, some of them sick, some of them blah, blah, blah. But at least I'd keep a head count of all the personnel, something over 3,000 or 4,000, I think, at this time. But I just had my charts, you know what I mean. You could do it in a couple, 3 hours if you was efficient enough with it. Well, that was my main part of the work at that time, was just strength and ration. And then if somebody was getting ready to go overseas, they needed a replacement. Well, it was up to me to recommend replacements. I didn't actually select, but usually my recommendation was accepted. So that put a little pressure. I didn't like that part of it too well because, well, you just know, you used to think, just because he's good, no use to kill him. That was my idea. And but then Washington came in and picked me up, and I traveled on the Inspector General's team out of Washington, D.C. And that was a good job, and they raised me up another grade sergeant. Well, I'd travel around over Third Army area from, well, Texas, Louisiana, a little bit of Oklahoma and back. And this went on all for a month or two and whatnot. It must have been getting well up into, well, at least the latter part of 43 by now. It had to be something like that. And anyway, I was now, like I say, Master Sergeant, and I met my wife, saw her, like I say, I had this Class A pass. I was in town 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Like I related earlier, I could do my job in not more than 4 or 5 hours. When I was through. Time was mine. Jeep sitting out there was mine. I'd come to town. Well, how many soldiers would you see in a dress uniform, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, roaming the streets of Abilene with his own transportation sitting out there? Well, that was a pretty good duty. Well, I met my wife. She was working for Jack Belsky Shoe Company. You probably know Belsky's. Fine folks. In fact, they come to our 50th wedding anniversary. They gave us a wedding party. How many Jews do that for an employee? Just not speaking, I'm just saying, it's just unusual. But anyhow, Jack and Sally were fine folk. And my wife was all of 17 then. Cute little thing dressed in the windows. I pecked on the window, and she looked up and smiled. I always told her it was all because she bent over backward, putting those displays up. And it attracted my attention. But anyway, I asked her for a coat. Well, she asked Jack. And Jack come out and met me before he said, "You go for a coat." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Be back in 30 minutes. Well, we go to the drugstore then. We just sit down. We just had a coat. I met her and she met me, and that was it, And then I think I scheduled out of town for a time or two, and we started. Every time I was out of town, we'd do a lot of riding. Never really went together like a lot of people. I mean, didn't, but make a long story short, well, she continued working for Jack Belsky, and I continued working with the Adjutant General's team. And whenever I was back in town, I was calling her, and I was writing her every time I was out, and she was writing me back. So we got well acquainted through mail, and I don't know. We had gone together, well, for 3 or 4 or 5 months, off and on. Like I say, I was gone as much as home. And whenever we was in town, we were together. But she, well, seemed, you know, to have a little interest in me, and I had a lot of interest in her. Well, all at once there was an opening for a candidate to go to Adjutant General School in Washington, D.C. for a couple of months. Well, that crossed my desk before anybody else's. Well, me and my nerve and the rest of it, I walked in the Colonel's office and I said, "Colonel, can I go to school?" He said, "I don't know why not." You know, well, there must have been 100 applications in there and filed. So it wasn't what you knew, it was who you knew and being at the right place at the right time. That's all it was, nothing else. But fortunately, I got recommended for the school. And I went to Washington, D.C. for a couple of months of school. Well, we wrote nearly every day. I called her 2 or 3 times a month anyhow. I called her 6 or 8 times while I was up there. And now, she would usually meet my transportation coming in off these trips too. But she met me coming back in from Washington off the train. And this was, well, this had to be just a little before Christmas. Just a little before Christmas. I guess I was up there September and back in the middle of November, you know. But the reason I'm getting a little confused here, because things move fast then. I mean, oh, you lived a life in 30 days, in many ways. People that's not 75 years old can't understand this, but that's the way life was. And so she met the train. We spent that evening together. Then we started going, well, I'd meet her at USO dances. We'd go to church on a Sunday. Go out of an evening, you know. And always went to Dr. She was Church of Christ, a fine Christian girl. And that's where I really got to know Paul Southern. I knew him a little before, but really got to know him because of attending his congregation. Well, like I say, we've become what I would call somewhat serious. And spend lots of time together. And so anyway, we come along, and Christmas, I thought perhaps I was going to get to go home for Christmas, but I didn't. But I never will forget, and she won't either. She gave me an identification bracelet with my name on it, and I gave her a little Bulova watch with 2 diamonds on each corner of it. And I had Christmas at her home. And so right after that, then I knew I was going to get a warrant, because I'd been to school, I'd made excellent grades, I'd come back, and there's an opening. So again, they didn't open those files. Said, "We've got a man that's proven his record right here in this office." And they just came to me and said, "Harold, how'd you like to be a warrant officer?" I said, "Well, that would be fine with me, no problem with that." And 23 years old, you know, I'm single, and going from, well, about $100 a month to $150 with all officer privileges, you know, and the rest of it. So I said, "Yeah, I believe I can handle that all right." So, like I say, I got real excellent letters of recommendation, real proud to show them to anybody, from the highest grade officers in the headquarters. Well, it was after passing the board, which was just a walk-in situation, I knew I was going to get my warrant. Well, they had awarded me a vacation of enlisted leave. I had about 3 weeks coming. Or that's what they gave me anyhow. So my warrant was going to be due the first 2 weeks of April is when it was gotten back. And so sometime latter part of February, I was supposed to get my leave and go to Illinois and be home for a while. Well, I just made up my mind. I didn't care whether I went home or not. That was really so I just asked her. I said, honey, is there any way you'd consider going on leave me in Illinois? Oh, Harold, you know, still 17.5-year-old. Complete stranger. Going to Mama's and Papa's? Maybe, you know. But anyway, I told her, I said, now look, we've got a 13-room house, 4 bedrooms. You'll have private baths, you'll have private bedroom. Everything will be private. And I said, I've already talked to my folks about it. They'll be tickled to death to have you visit. Well, we talked to her folks. They finally just said, well, yes. So, stupidly, we decided that she'd go on leave with me for this length of time. Well, we didn't leave immediately. We fooled a few days around Abilene, I don't know just what, probably buying her some clothes and, you know, getting kind of, I don't just rightfully remember, but we get on this train, Texas Eagle, and that Texas Eagle was a fine train back in its day. It was the deluxe train of the hall, but it was another just troop train. I mean, people were standing in the aisles, they were sitting on bags. There was just any place you could get. 1 square foot was your home if you could find it. Well, we sat on barracks bags and all the rest of it, and finally got into St. Louis. Then from St. Louis, we transferred onto another train, got into Effingham, Illinois, 20 miles from home, and folks met us. Well, we arrived in Illinois sometime the first 2 or 3 days of March. And now, I've already told you I was relatively successful young man. I'd already bought and paid for a brand new 1941 Chevrolet automobile before I went into service. Well, that was parked in the garage. I knew that. Well, a little money in the bank, but not much, just enough to get gas. But we get to Illinois, and she meets my grandparents, she meets my parents. We go out to some of the places I was born and raised, and some of the dinner clubs, you know, and she never went anywhere. They went, are you 18? You know what I mean? Because up in Illinois, everything's wide open. And no drunks. I just meant you couldn't go to a restaurant without being offered a drink. That was just the way of life. You know, she never drank anyway, so that didn't bother any, but we'd go have her food. And so, I don't know. We was due back someplace around the 18th or the 20th, you know, off leave. We just decided we wanted to get married. Well, I just told my folks, well, we're going to get married. Oh, you know how mothers are. Harold, you sure? You know what I mean. Well, how can we do that? We only got 3 days. Well, you got to, I don't care. I said, now I'm going to take your car back. I'm going to take my car. With or without being married, because there's not going to be any difference between me and her. You know what I mean. Than they always have been. But now, Mom said, oh, I don't want to see you drive down there. 2 of you driving back 2 or 3 days on the road. I said, well, I'm going to take my car, married or not. Mom says, well, we better get married. So we did. Had a little home wedding 25, 30 people, a family, you know. Called her folks, told her folks, called her grandpa, and they said, well, we figured that when you left, you know. And she was just barely 18. So anyway, we got married in Illinois. Drove back to Texas, had our honeymoon in Little Rock, Arkansas. Got back down to Texas. I reported back to duty. Just bided time till my warrant came through. I had about 30 days. Well, our first apartment, getting back to the way Abilene treats you now, was one of those very, very swanky, first class chicken coops. That was really, I mean, a converted chicken coop. It couldn't have been more than a 12 by 12 with a bed, hot plate, and commode. But that was home. That was all you could get. Well, we moved out of that into a relatively nice room. But that room was just a little small. I mean, it was just no place to do anything except just go to bed and bathe. That's just about all you could do. So anyway, we finally ended up in just a little bit oversized one-car garage, converted. And I mean, this was as good as there was to be had.
Was your wife already a member of the Blue Bonnet?
Yes, she had been a member of the Blue Bonnet. She was one of the originals. I don't know what the age limits were on that, backing up to this, but she was original Blue Bonnet girl. And I know she wasn't old enough to be, but she was, because she was not old enough to do lots of things she was doing, but she looked it, and nobody checked it, and her classification in school made her qualified. But yes, she was an original, and like I said, I do have a copy of the original application. The only thing is they put an E on her name that she doesn't use because her name is Steele. But
and what was her first name?
Hazel. Hazel Geraldine Steele. And her sister Charlotte Steele was the first Miss Abilene Beauty Queen winner. And she had another sister, Billy, and Patricia Ann. So she had three sisters. Billy is deceased. Charlotte and Pat still reside in Abilene. But now, we've moved along here, and life is good. I got my warrant in April. The war in Europe was slowing down. Then 39th Ambulance Battalion that I had been with had been sent to Australia as a replacement for the battalion that we were more or less making for this Army headquarters. Well, 4th Army, I don't think ever did go out of the States, but 3rd Army did. Well, there I was, 23 years old, married, ready to get out of the Army. Well, Lord, I guess saw fit one we did. Making an honest statement the first way, only way I know how. The first 10 days we was married, she got pregnant. Never feed and fail. Of course, I said I didn't know how it happened, but nevertheless, her mother didn't need to tell me that what happened. But anyway, so there we were, 23-year-old pregnant, with the possibility of overseas orders. Well, I began to think. I said, there got to be a way out of this some way. I got a business to run back home. I'm needed a lot worse back home than here. Well, the war in Europe was, I don't remember where the armistice was assigned, but it was in the process. And Japanese war was nearly, when they were closing down Camp Barkeley, it was already in the process of being closed down. Well, it just got down to the point one day that conversation came up, and I said, well, what's going to happen to all of these fellas? And they said, well, you get transferred around here someplace. You'll probably end up over in New Orleans or someplace in the hospital, or something like that. I said, sir, I said, why don't you just let me go home? I said, I'm ready to go home. Well, he said, Harold, he said, I see your point. He said, I understand. But he said, it's not quite that simple. But anyway, I had been sick, some in the hospital. I contacted some kind of a stomach bug. I don't know what. In fact, they even thought I might have had stomach cancer at that time. And I had spent a good 30, 40 days in the hospital. So I certainly didn't want a medical discharge, so that wasn't my aim at all. Thought about it. So I came up with the idea. I said, well, I'll tell you, I'm really not needed here. Why don't we do this? I said, I know that I can take a letter of separation and a certificate of service, and I can go home if I transfer to a reserve corps. But I said, I want to be transferred to a reserve corps on an inactive duty status, not active. Well, I got that pulled off, and I've got a certificate of service and a letter of separation, and transferred to Officers Reserve Corps in active duty. Well, that protected me about ever being recalled as a buck private. And of course, when Korea broke out, everything might have happened. But anyway, I got out of service on a good, square, honest transaction. Was not needed, and this all happened. Well, officially I didn't get out of service till 95, but I was on an extended leave. 1st of November, my grandfather had gotten real ill. In fact, they thought he was going to die. And that was right in the middle of a grain harvest. And they were desperate. And some of the town folks and whatnot even tried to, be knowing that the business was really hurting. Farmers couldn't get rid of their stuff. It was about enough. They needed a place, somebody to operate. So I got leave from service. Talked to my wife. Johnny wasn't due till December. And this was the 1st of November. So I said, well, I'll go to Illinois for 30 days, 6 weeks, whatever, and be back in time for the birth and help them up there and down here. Then after necessary length of time, well, we just moved back to Illinois. Well, I got on a train and left to go back to Illinois. It must have been the 7th that I left here on November. I get to Illinois, of course, 24-hour train ride. Next morning, a long-distance phone call. My wife was in the hospital, baby born, mother and child not expected to live. Son born breech birth, 3.5 pounds. Well, I just picked up my shaving bag and another train ticket, and my folks, well, what we did, we'd missed the train from St. Louis. We couldn't get there in time for the train. borrowed a car from my cousin. He had a new Buick. We drove that Buick from Illinois to Little Rock, Arkansas, and caught the train that left St. Louis in Arkansas. Then my sister returned the car. But my mother and my father and I returned to Abilene with my wife in the hospital, not expected to live. You know, in fact, the doctors gave her a choice of she or the baby. Just before the, she said, well, save the baby, you know. But anyway, that was our beginning. He turned out fine. She turned out average considered. I mean, I'm not saying it didn't hurt her. I know it did hurt her. It hurt future health and all the rest of it. But she was a good Christian lady, good spunk, fine, lovely mother, a tremendous wife. And just no way to speak well enough of her. So anyway, that's how our son was born. Then I actually got my final papers till we spent early part of January living back in Illinois. Took my son away too soon. I wouldn't do this now. We were kids. I didn't know. She didn't know. But her mother went with us. And I think he was 6 weeks old when we took off for Illinois in a car, moving a 3.5-pound baby. but you know, I gained up to 5 pounds, was doing well. It worked, everything went well, and fortunately, life was good to us from then on. We moved into an apartment that was available till I could buy a house, and we bought a house that had been built in '41, which was practically brand new then, and like I said, I already had my new car, had a business to run. Business took off, made a little money, and we had a good life. And I don't want to brag about it, but it was a good life. We lived halfway between Indianapolis and St. Louis, 200 miles from Chicago. We saw every dance, every big band dance deal. Spent lots of time in some of the finer hotels, and enjoyed life. Well, I don't know how much of our married life you want discussed.
Well, how did you wind up back in Abilene, or when did
Well,
you come?
We wound up in Abilene just by general turn of events. Like I say, business was good, everything was fantastic, but nothing stays the same. Well, all of the railroad cars that the railroad had used all during the service was all worn out. They weren't rebuilding any new cars. Well, trucks were coming in prevalently. The government had come out with a Commodity Credit Corporation. They'd come out with government storage. They'd come out with all kind of government programs. Well, this was a small town. Illinois Central Railroad serviced from New Orleans to Chicago. But would you believe they closed Illinois Central Railroad that went through right by my grain elevator? Well, I had the largest grain elevator in the county, but it wouldn't anyway near hold a harvest, and I didn't want to get into the trucking business to transport grain, and I was 39 years old at this time, and it just looked to me like my grandfather had passed on. My folks were not wealthy, but with Social Security and their bills paid, they could have made it reasonably well. You know, they would have been able to be comfortable. So I said, shoot, my folks are able to retire, and I'm less than 40. There must be something out there that's going better than this is going to be. So the government, well, when they took over the grain business and the railroad closed down, it made it impractical to stay in the grain business, because that business today is just where I thought it would be. The old boy's got a couple of $1 million worth of tin cans and wore out trucks that's not worth anything in a lifetime of work. Every dollar you made, you spent two to stay in for additional facilities. And when my health was, I was working too hard, and we just figured it was time to change. Well, we went to Florida, and we spent 6 weeks in Florida. Florida didn't have anything that attracted as much as Abilene. We didn't have much roots, but we have more roots here than anywhere else. So really, I leased that business to another organization that had a fleet of trucks. The lease did not work out. They ended up going bankrupt. So I, fortunately, ended up selling it a couple, 3 years later, successful enough that it didn't hurt me or the family, and we'd already moved back to Texas. Well, like I say, we knew a few people in Texas, and so now that's how we got back to Abilene, Texas. But we spent over 14 years in Illinois. We moved back to Abilene, bought this house, lived in this house ever since 1960. So that's a good long time. Well, the son was ready for high school, and he started high school. Well, his last year at Lincoln, then he was second class at Cooper. Graduated from Cooper. So we educated him in Texas, which he really wanted to do. And I always kidded her. Of course, it was never true. I told her she finally threw enough Texas fits, we finally had to move back. But anyway, no, she hadn't known my wife. That girl was queen of everything up there. I mean, she was head of all the ladies' organizations, was head of the PTA. The committee wanted something done. She was the leader. She got volunteered for cookies every time there was any ever built. Never will forget one thing that girl did that amazed the entire community. My son was pretty tender-hearted, but he got feeling sorry for a little boy whose folks lived out in the country on a mud road that didn't really care much about the little boy in the first place. And he was just a little urchin. Half fed and underclothed, you know what I mean, the whole ball of wax. Well, my son got, feeling sorry for Rusty. The holiday's coming up. And, of course, my boy was talking about this, that, and the other. Little old Rusty didn't have nothing to talk about. So one day, I don't know how she made contact with Rusty's folks. But I think she may have asked him, she may not have, I don't know, but I think she did. If Rusty could spend a couple, 3 days with us. And for some reason, he did. Well, she took that boy to the barber shop. She took him, bathed him and dressed him and cleaned him up, bought him a whole wardrobe of brand new clothes. And the teacher didn't know him when he went back to school. And she really, fixed that little boy up right. And Rusty and Johnny today are friends, I mean, still. And that was her nature. Like I say, they had lots of little vaudeville deals. My wife always had a certain amount of she just enjoyed, she would like to have been an actress and could have done so reasonably well, I think. But she liked that kind of deal.
A little bit of ham in
there. Yeah, a little ham. I couldn't think of the word, but the ham is the word. Well, she stole the show in anything that she was in. And like I say, they had several productions. They even took into Terre Haute, Indiana, and different communities, not as a commercial basis. More or less, it was all charitable. But they had a well, a lady that had spent time in New York as their boss. I can't think of the word. Anyhow, she was would put these plays together and then train them, and then they go put them on. But she was well known. She tried to get my wife to. In fact, she had an appointment on for a screen test, which my wife was all hopped up about till time to go, and then she said no, she didn't want to go. But I must say this, crediting my wife, like I say, she was very, very active, loved better. She more people knew her up there than they did me. You know, I mean. Now, two things come back in my mind. The first is we moved back to Illinois, and my baby was small. Well, I think we got to town maybe on a Wednesday or a Thursday. You know where she went Sunday? She drove 7 miles out in the country to a Church of Christ with that baby on her hip. Never looked back. Well, I was not a member of the Church of Christ at that time. And I thought I was too busy, you know. Well, about 3 Sundays in a row she went to church, and I didn't. Well, the fourth one I think I went, and kept going pretty much thereafter. And it wasn't long till I was baptized, but I can't help but give her credit for any Christianity that I might have. That little girl led me. And it's all through association with Dr. Paul Southern and people like him, gets back to roots, you know, and all the rest of it. But she was, and then, this interview,
Sound like a good pair. Good
this interview might not have been about my wife. However, I'm going to make this statement. She was awarded a real beautiful plaque as one of the 25 most outstanding women of Southern Hills congregation of 2,000 people. She was awarded well, I'll get to that in a minute. She was the head of the 39ers. President 3 times, secretary 4 or 5 times, was a definite leader in a church. She wasn't a teacher, but she was a leader, and she had more young people, 3 to 5 year olds, knowing her than most of the class teachers did. She always had a pocket full of gum, and every child out there wanted the gum girl. There she comes, and they all got their gum. Well, she got this award. Of course, she also was awarded, I call it an award because to me it is, our John Reese, fine Christian man. I don't know, maybe he does this for everybody, but for my wife, he placed in the Abilene Church of Christ University, ACU, a leather-bound book with a silver plaque in remembering my wife, donated by John Reese. Well, I thought that was quite a gesture, you know, for her to get that much attention. To me, that was a fabulous idea. Mm-hmm. Well, she got a special award from Funeral Directors Association of the state of Texas as being one of the outstanding women. She, I guess maybe everybody got those. I don't know how she got it, but I got a letter from Lyndon B. Johnson's wife and a letter from Hillary recognizing her death. I don't know why nor how, but we did have her 50th anniversary, and these came about that time. But anyway, wind this up on my wife in just a second. We had a good life. She was a wonderful wife, wonderful mother, loved by everybody. Never, to my knowledge, harmed anybody in any way. And if anybody was ever prepared to pass, she was. She wasn't ready, but she was prepared. But one of the most touching things that ever happened, like I say, she went to the mall on Friday evening after getting her hair fixed. That was the 7th day of March. Our anniversary was the 11th. She had purchased me an anniversary card for our 51st anniversary. I didn't even know she had it. Well, she died on the 8th. I didn't find the card till after she was buried. And I've got it in my records over here. She could not have said more. Thank you for being my friend, and thank you for being so good to me all these years. Love you, Hazel. Well, now that's, find out after she's gone is a pretty good tribute. I found that after we buried her, and I planted that tree in the backyard in her memory. So this place is going to have lots of family relaxing. Kids may sell it, they may not want it, I don't know, but that's their business. Now, some way in this interview, seemed like my wife took over. However, no, if you want me to continue on what we did in Abilene and how we made a living, we've not got.
I think we've pretty much covered. You did a wonderful job. Wonderful.
Well,
I think you covered everything perfectly.
Well, see, the funeral supply business is what I got into, and retired in 1980, and that's my life basically.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful life.
And like I say, they probably come out pretty redneck, and the Lord was with me because I sat here and had more air than I would have had if you hadn't been here. It's good to have company, I think.
Yeah. Well, I certainly enjoyed it.
Well,
great talking to you.
Thanks for listening, I guess. But you think that is something maybe what you wanted?
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Well, now, do you want a copy of any of the documents we talked about?
Yes, I would. However, let me talk with Dr. Williams first, and maybe I can come back someday and pick
Oh,
them
yes.
up. Okay. Actually, and I do have some release papers